On a night when it was pouring with rain, a young, beautiful girl got into an odd police car. At night in the city, it is raining heavily and thunder is rumbling. A girl was at home watching TV. The fireplace matches kept burning when suddenly the phone rang. As she had received an impromptu call from a friend, she hurriedly got dressed, grabbed an umbrella, and got ready to go to her friend's house for a party. With an umbrella in hand, the girl walked down the dark streets. Because of the faulty wiring of the street lamps caused by the heavy rain, the girl could only rely on the light of the flashlight to see the way. Suddenly, a police car stopped next to the girl and two police officers approached. In a very gentle tone, they said that they were concerned for her safety, so they were going to give her a ride. The girl was very surprised by this, because police in the United States don't take care of civilians in such a considerate way. Those cops are just guys who get paid to do nothing. But after seeing the badges they handed over, she let her guard down because in the girl's mind, no one would dare to impersonate a police officer. As a bolt of lightning illuminated the entire street, she spotted the two eager cops with the corners of their mouths turned up in a strange expression. But the girl didn't think much of it, her head leaning against the window of the car, listening to the sound of the rain hitting the windows, fantasizing that she would be able to enjoy the party when she got to her friend's house. But it wasn't until she watched the police car speed through the pouring rain, only to get further and further away from the destination she was headed to. It was only then that the panicked girl carefully recalled the actions of the two cops, their sudden concern, and that odd smile. It was then she remembered that there had been a news story on TV. Two local serial killers who specialized in murdering girls would pose as police officers, and after luring them into their cars, they would take them home and then torture and violate them until they finally murdered them again. This is a true crime story about the Hillside Stranglers. The Hillside Stranglers is a reference to the nickname of Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono Jr. Kenneth Bianchi was born on May 22, 1951 in Rochester, New York City. Kenneth's mother was a prostitute with a penchant for alcohol, and his biological father was unknown, meaning that he was most likely the child of one of his mother's clients. Kenneth's mother is trying not to let this unwanted child drag down her quality of life. At the outset, she puts Kenneth up for adoption to a local welfare agency and then to other people. However, Kenneth displayed a short-tempered personality early on and would throw away what he could get his hands on when no one was looking. He would also viciously sink his teeth into his adoptive mother's breasts while she was breastfeeding him. Despite Kenneth's above-average intelligence, after seeing the ways in which he deceived others, his foster mother sent him to a private Catholic school in an attempt to limit his violent behavior. However, instead of restricting his violent thoughts, the strict religious system influenced his expectations of women, who he often thought were perfectly compatible with the Catholic standard of purity. But after coming into contact with many women, Kenneth realizes that most of the women he meets are not pure. They are all too open. However, by chance, Kenneth hears about his biological mother, leading to a gradual disillusionment with women and a distorted view of them. At the age of 13, his adoptive father died due to pneumonia, so after his adoptive mother ran out of privileges, she went and got a couple of jobs to try and keep the family afloat. However, due to financial pressures, Kenneth went back to public school and attended classes. In school, Kenneth was very motivated, and his classmates around him thought he was a very nice person. So after graduation, he married his high school sweetheart. During their 8 months together, Kenneth's wife realized that he was very immature and would only live in his own fantasies every day and would not get a job. In particular, Kenneth could not even take care of his own life, and his wife helped him every time, so they divorced. Irritated by his ex-wife, Kenneth immediately drops out of college, and after a long and painful job search, he finally finds a job in a jewelry store, where he is responsible for protecting the store employees as well as the jewels, i.e., he becomes a security guard. But Kenneth didn't think the jewelry in the jewelry store was safe, and he felt there was a safer place suitable for storing the jewelry, so he would often steal some of the jewelry and take it home. The jewelry became the capital for Kenneth to show off in front of his girlfriend and some prostitutes. However, since Kenneth had committed many thefts, he gave up his job and fled to Los Angeles in order not to be arrested by the police. In Los Angeles, he shares an apartment with his cousin Angelo Buono. Angelo is a very vicious man, a sadist who especially likes to control people's minds. and his history of sexual violence impresses Kenneth. Since they are both people who want to get something for nothing in a short exchange, Angelo convinces Kenneth. They contact some of the prostitutes and agree to become their agents, responsible for keeping them safe as well as finding them more clients, and they receive a certain amount of payment as a salary. Because of their personalities and their penchant for abusing the girls, their pimping business wasn't too successful. Of note is the fact that two of the girls couldn't take the sexual abuse from Angelo. They ran away late one night while Angelo and Kenneth were out looking for clients. They even stole some money. Upon learning that the two prostitutes had escaped, Angelo was so furious that he broke a piece of glass with his hand so hard that, although it caused him to pay for stitches afterward, it unsurprisingly shook the other prostitutes so that they never ran away again. But Kenneth is used to the unearned money, so he calls out to Angelo and prepares to go out and find more girls to work for them. Inside a dingy bar, Kenneth sends a sum of money to the bar's bartender, trying to get some information out of him about girls who want to make money. Looking at the blinking light bulbs above his head and the drunks that are laying on the floor, Kenneth is in an irritated mood, but by the time the bartender introduces him to a girl, excitedly he walks out of the door of the bar with Angelo in tow and immediately drives to the girl. But unfortunately for the girl, even though she wants to make money very badly, she doesn't agree to be a prostitute. Much to their dismay, Angelo and Kenneth pay for another message from one of the prostitutes, which includes the names of some of the prostitutes as well as some of their clients. But their luck is very bad and they get scammed again. Angry Angelo and Kenneth tried to catch the prostitute who cheated them right then and there, but even after searching the whole street, they couldn't find it. Late one night, Kenneth is drinking at a bar, depressed and sipping on his booze. But something a customer at the table next to him says amuses him because he hears something about the prostitute who cheated on them that night. So he hurriedly called out to Angelo, and together they headed to a dark alley where the prostitute's friend, Yolanda Washington, was. The alley was pitch black, with only the sound of a leaking pipe nearby. They crept into a house in the alley, and since the lock on the door was deteriorating, they easily opened the room, then immediately rushed into the bedroom, grabbed a pillow and covered Yolanda's head. Even though Yolanda continued to struggle, tearing at Kenneth's clothes with her hands and attempting to scratch Kenneth with her fingernails, her strength weakened over time until she passed out. A few minutes later, Angelo brought a tub of cold water and poured it over Yolanda's body, who immediately awoke from the cold water. Immediately afterward, Kenneth opened his mouth and inquired about the whereabouts of the prostitute, and as he spoke, he burned Yolanda with a cigarette. Even though Yolanda cried that she was not sure, Angelo and Kenneth did not let her go, and they took a stick and kept beating Yolanda until bruises appeared on her body. They then undressed Yolanda and violated her. However, it didn't end there. They took a piece of cloth and gagged Yolanda's mouth and nose and killed her straight away. Relying on the darkness of the night, they drove right up to the entrance of Forest Lawn Cemetery. When no one was around, they dumped the body in the bush next to the entrance. Due to bad taste, Kenneth also placed the body in a very strange position. This was the first murder done by the Hillside Stranglers, and this murder pushed them completely over the edge and set off a wave of horrific killings. The next victim was a teenager, 15 years old at the age of enjoying her youth. Her name was Judith Miller, a girl with long flowing black hair, a native of Los Angeles. On that day, she was planning to take a trip to Glendale Hills, a famous Los Angeles attraction, to vent her depressed feelings. Because Judith had a fight with her family, feeling angry, she chose to run away from home. But being on her way to her destination, Judith was targeted by Kenneth. At that time, Kenneth and Angelo were on their way running around looking for their prey. Their first thought was that there must be a large number of out-of-town tourists in the attraction. However, even if they killed those out-of-town tourists, the time of day would cause no one to notice the out-of-town tourists were missing, so they arrived at a park close to Glendale Hills. In the car, Kenneth and Angelo are arguing over money when a girl passes them by, and that girl is also Judith. For Kenneth and Angelo, who have already tasted murder, a lively girl is their best prey. On October 31st, 1977, Judith's body was found in a garden near Glendale Hill. According to the autopsy report, she had been strangled, and when her body was first found, she was disheveled and her bare legs were deliberately diamond-shaped. Time passed slowly and a third victim emerged. Her name was Elissa Caston, and she was only 21 years old, a dancer and waitress working in North Hollywood. On that day, November 5th, 1977, she had the misfortune of meeting Kenneth and Angelo. Despite Elissa's constant struggles, she appeared weak against the beating of the two young, strong adult males, and she was then forcibly violated and eventually brutally murdered. 3 days later, on November 9th, 1977, the body of 18-year-old prostitute Jill Barkham was found in North Beverly Hills with the same characteristics as the first 3 victims. As the LAPD investigated the 3 murders, they realized that all of the victims were either some prostitutes or runaway children. So they suspected that the murders might have been committed by a serial killer rather than a random incident. And in that time period, there was no DNA testing, no criminal gene pool, which meant that they had no way of finding out who the killer was. However, the murders at Hillside Stranglers didn't stop there. Within just 1 month, there were 3 more victims, all of whose bodies were found on various hillsides. At this point, the media began to report heavily, as these victims were not marginalized members of society, as they had been before, but very vulnerable young girls. Since all of the victims were assaulted and then murdered, people in Los Angeles began to become fearful, especially young girls who were afraid to go out at night, or even step out of their homes alone for fear that a killer might appear in the shadows at any moment to murder them. And in a very detailed story reported on the website, they revealed the results of the victim's autopsy. They state that the killer injects cleaning fluids into the girls to give them a very painful physical reaction, beating and torturing them until they die. And the LAPD also based their reports on the bodies of these victims. They discovered a horrifying fact. They described the killer as being like a blank sheet of paper at the time of the first murder, not knowing anything. But he had a very strong ability to learn, like he was constantly refining his sadistic techniques. And the detectives also discovered a horrifying fact. They guessed that there was more than one murderer because it was impossible for one person to do the kidnapping as well as the murder and clean up all the traces of the crime in a short period of time. So they thought that so many murders were done by 2 people. However, the fact that the detectives interrogated Kenneth during the investigation of the missing girls, because one of the girls lived in the same building as him, the detectives didn't realize that the Kenneth they were interrogating was one of the serial killers. When the detectives were questioning him, they just thought the young man was very polite and intelligent, so they didn't suspect him. As the busy LAPD continued to investigate the leads, within 10 days they found 2 more victims, 2 very young girls, a young 28-year-old, Jane King, and an 18-year-old, Lauren Wagner. Apparently, they had been subjected to unspeakable and inhumane torture before they were killed. And this time the torture was even more horrific, as according to the tests, one of the girls was burned alive in a fire by her killer while she was awake. This also means that the police's reasoning was correct, and that the killers were constantly refining their methods of torture. But in the meantime, the police got a very important clue. One of Lauren Wagner's neighbors said, shortly before Lauren disappeared, probably within a few hours, she had an argument with 2 men on the street. The 2 men looked Latino. One looked young and the other looked older, and they were parked next to a dark-colored car with a white roof. But since he was mowing the lawn in front of his house at the time, he wasn't quite sure what happened after that. With that piece of information, the police quickly ruled out non-Latino suspects and did an all-out search for information about the whereabouts of the car. But a few days later, a new victim emerged, a 22-year-old prostitute, Kimberly Martin. Although police expected the killer's behavior to become increasingly violent next, they didn't find any escalation of violence in Martin's case. Even though the LAPD was constantly investigating information about all the victims as they tried to figure out why the killer was targeting them, it was going nowhere because most of the victims were on the fringes of society, existences that no one would have noticed even if they had disappeared. A few weeks later, a new victim showed up, this time 23-year-old Cindy Lee Hudspeth, a waitress. It was early one sunny morning when a young man wanted to go out for a run while it was cool. As he ran slowly to the edge of a cliff, he noticed that the guardrail next to the road had been knocked away, and then he reached out to see that there was actually a car at the bottom of the cliff. In the spirit of wanting to save lives, he rushed around the side to the bottom of the cliff, thought strangely enough there was no one in the driver's seat, and the car looked like it had fallen off the cliff on its own. But when he looked down, he realized that there was a large dark red smear of blood on the rear of the car. Realizing that this was most likely a murder, the young man hurriedly called the police and explained everything. As the police arrived at the scene, they set up the guardrail, put on gloves, and cautiously opened the trunk of the car. A girl was lying on her side in the trunk. Her clothes were disheveled. There were signs of scratches on her skin, most notably the strangulation marks on her neck. So the police understood that this was another kidnapping and murder committed by the Hillside Stranglers. So the LAPD, as well as a large number of media outlets, kept reporting the news, warning all young women not to go out alone. As time went on, the Hillside Stranglers never found another young woman alone, so they disbanded the group. A few days later, Kenneth's girlfriend, Kelly Boyd, gave birth to a son. Tired of the hustle and bustle of Los Angeles and her distaste for Kenneth's lifestyle, she took the baby and headed right back to Washington State to live with her parents. Learning of his girlfriend's return home, Kenneth spends his days pleading to be reunited with her, spending his time begging Kelly for forgiveness. A soft-hearted Kelly eventually relented, though she demanded that Kenneth come to Washington State to live with her. Kenneth agrees, and returns to his normal life, taking a job as a security guard, where he doesn't continue to steal, but just settles into his duties as a security guard, taking care of the kids with Kelly. But the peaceful life didn't quell Kenneth's desire to kill, and even with a happy and fulfilling family, he is still constantly on the lookout for new victims. With Angelo out of the picture, he set out on his own. It was early one morning and two young girls were looking for work on the streets, Karen Mandick and Diane Wilder. Kenneth, who was standing guard in the security room, saw them and immediately went forward to inquire about them. After learning that the two young girls were looking for work, Kenneth had the bright idea to say that there was an employer around who happened to be hiring babysitters, and that they offered very generous benefits. Karen and Diane were naturally excited about the job and asked Kenneth to take them to the employer's house to find out what it was really like. It was a very high-end looking house, and the girls were excited to tour the interior of the house when Kenneth made his move. He took a piece of cloth and blindfolded Karen, then kicked her down the stairs. Karen rolled from the second floor to the first floor and fainted due to the huge impact. And the panicked Diane didn't escape as she was directly choked unconscious by Kenneth's hand. The excited Kenneth immediately tied up the girls who had fallen into unconsciousness and woke them up by splashing them with cold water before beating them severely with a stick. When Kenneth heard Karen and Diane screaming, he became very excited and violated the girls by choking them and tearing their clothes. Until finally, feeling fatigued, Kenneth showed no mercy at all and murdered Karen and Diane directly with a rope. But without Angelo's help, Kenneth left many clues behind. As the detectives investigated, they easily discovered the traces Kenneth had left behind. In particular, Kenneth was arrested after the detectives found a piece of paper in Karen's car detailing that they were going to tour the house with Kenneth. Kenneth, who had never been hurt before, was also quick to tell the detectives about his accomplice Angelo, who was then also captured by the police within a few days. Finally, after a series of trials, Kenneth and Angelo were sentenced to life in prison. And Angelo died on September 21, 2002 at the age of 67 at the Calipatria State Prison in California due to heart problems. Today, however, Kenneth is still serving time in prison, and the latest news is that he will have a round of parole hearings in 2025, but it's almost impossible for the court to pass them,